Good afternoon, everybody. I am Andrew Cappetta, the Manager of Collection and Exhibition Programs at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's Desktop Dialogue. While other guests are joining us, use this time to familiarize yourself with the chat interface. To join the chat, just enter your name, or really any name that you prefer, and click to agree to the terms of service and the privacy policy. You can use this chat to make comments during the program at any time. In fact, now, if you want to let us know where you're coming from, that'd be wonderful. And when you have a question, pop it in the chat too. We're going to reserve time at the end of the program for questions. So if you have comments and questions during, feel free to include those and filter those through because we're going to keep today's event kind of conversational. Below the screen is a list of web resources that relate to this afternoon's program, including some of the artworks, as well as our information about the LGBT Community Center at Greater Cleveland. So feel free to take a look at those now or later. And lastly, this program is being recorded, so you can watch it later on the CMA website or our YouTube channel. So stay tuned, that should be posted sometime tomorrow or by the end of the week. If you need to duck out early, want to watch again, or want to share with a friend, just check there. So for today's program, we invited 3 teens from the Queer Youth Initiative, which is also called QYou, at the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland, to choose a few artworks from the CMA collection made by LGBTQ plus artists. Together, we're going to discuss their selections and how the representation of queer artists in the museum resonates with them. It's been a really wonderful experience getting to know these 3 young folks, so I'm excited for our conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Jax Shalene, who is a student at Firestone High School. Jax enjoys painting and seeing other works of art, and I must say is a quite astute observer of art and has a lot to say about it. Along with that, he wants to make the world a little more accepting for the LGBTQ plus community through opening dialogues and spreading awareness about the community. Welcome, Jax. It's great to have you.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Awesome. Next, I'd like to welcome Hallie Praneda. Hallie is a writer just trying to navigate life. She enjoys writing short stories and poetry and creating art, specifically paintings, about her identity and also mental illness. When she's not writing or painting, she's usually playing video games or watching other people play video games on YouTube, which I know is a very popular pastime for many ages right now. Welcome, Hallie. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, for sure, I would like to welcome Jana Formica. Jana is an ambitious young woman with a passion for advocacy and storytelling. She's a recent high school graduate of Cleveland School of the Arts with a love for all things art, and she is pursuing a degree in urban studies at Cleveland State University. Awesome. Welcome, Jana. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So, each of you explored the CMA's collection using the new LGBTQ plus artists after 1900 search filter, which you can find on our collection online under popular search filters, and there should be a link down below for that. And you selected a work that compelled you in some way and that you wanted to know more about. Jax, we're going to start with your selection. You chose American artist Jared French's 1947 painting, Evasion, which we are looking at right now, which is on view in the CMA galleries. And when we were discussing it a week or 2 ago in preparation for this event, you said that it looked like it was made by a queer person. And I'm curious about what made you say that and what drew you to select this particular work of art.
The reason I said it looked like it was made by a queer person is I think this sense of disconnect you get between like yourself and your body in this piece that you see here, or like the sense that like your body is wrong, or like I've heard people say before, like the flesh is impure, or like the sinful flesh or something like that, where like this sense that your body is wrong, like that you need to not listen to it and not pay attention to that. and I think that's like a very queer experience overall, or it's something that a lot of queer people have experienced. And so like I see that in this painting a lot with like the man looking in the mirror but not seeing himself, or like looking down at himself but it's shameful, or even like the man like praying, you know, it's um just a lot of shame and a lot of like, I don't know, like hatred towards your body. And I
Hmm.
like and as like a trans person I really really relate to that, like the sense that like that you can't you can't experience your body fully, I guess. And so and just exist in it without it being wrong or being like messed up in some way. And so I guess I really see that come through with you know, with the different figures in this painting.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful visual analysis. Especially you're really picking up on these different, the body positions here, which I think is really, really important. And maybe making that connection between the prayerful gesture on the right side of the painting and this sort of gestures of sort of shame on the left side of the painting. Now, I want to I want to talk more about this connection in terms of this idea of like being disconnected from your body as a queer person, like as we see it in this piece. How do you think this kind of connects with what you learned about Jared French? A queer man in the 1940s, and how does that sort of like connect to the modern day? Like, how do you see yourself connecting with this artist of the past?
Well, so Jared French was like openly bisexual in the, or like at least among the art community in like the 30s through 50s when he was making these paintings. And so like and like even more than today, there's like this sense of like purity culture and like like being gay is shameful for one thing, you know, like very much like we don't want that here, that's not allowed. Just, you know, like that is wrong and sinful and a disgrace. It's like degradation, or that's not the word, but like um degradation. Like it's just wrong. And so, and like I guess I find it odd, like, or interesting that I like, you know, decades in the future still connect and still have these like feelings and or experiences and like vicariously feel this like this sense of like shame and like hiding and like wrongfulness.
Hmm.
And like even like with the prayer with the man on his knees, like Lil Nas just came out with this video called "The Sun Goes Down," or a music video, and in it, like he's, you know, it shows him in that position on his knees praying to not be gay, you know, and so that's still something that a lot of queer people experience today. You know, it's something that um happened back then, and it's still happening today with like, you know, even just that sense of like someone on their knees praying, like, I don't want to be this way. Like, please make me not be myself, you know? And so like so I really see that and I connect with it, and like um and that's not all of that his work, you know, not all of his work is about this, and like about this negative aspect of being queer, but like, you know, this is certainly um a very common experience for queer people and something
Hmm.
that happened then and is still happening today.
Yeah, you mentioned not all of his work is like that. I think we have another a photograph that's actually part of a collective of artists that Jared French was part of, and this is of the photographer George Platt Lines, and I think it was taken on Fire Island. What do you and what do you see? I don't know. What do you see? How is this a bit different to you than the Jared than Evasion? What seems how is this
So this
distinct?
Yeah, so this was made by like he had a photograph collective with like his wife and his artistic partner, possibly romantic partner. And they would go there's like a lot of photographs that they took of them and of other people from Fire Island, which is where like all the gay people would go to vacation. um and so and but basically that's like a place where they could be free and be themselves and be, you know, very open, I would say. And so I just love this photograph because it shows this gay man, like, you know, even I'm not sure when it was, but you know, somewhere between the 30s and the 50s, um, just being very, very okay with himself, very at peace, very like, you know, like happy, you know, joyful, like prideful. And so I love like the confidence that this image shows. And like, you know, it's kind of like he's like on top of the world in this moment, or
Mhm.
just very content and very at peace with himself. And I really love that, and I really love to see that. And that like even, you know, even when like, you know, you could be arrested or killed for being gay at this time, like people still found ways to be joyful and prideful and like um happy with themselves and in themselves.
I think that's a really beautiful comparison, um, Jax. Thank you for bringing bringing these things together. And to add to, one of the interesting things is that these photographs by the Pajama Collective, as they're called, just like the things that you wear, you know, when you go to bed. We'll spell it a little bit differently, I should say. There's a PA instead of a Y, but anyway, instead of a PY. But yeah, these were kind of also like maybe there were studies, or at least they had very small scale circulation. They weren't, you know, paintings that would have been viewed in a gallery or a museum in a more public space. So I wonder if that is also a reason why we have this more prideful, comfortable, right, stance of this sort of queer man in his own skin. I think it's a really wonderful um, sort of reading of it. I'd like to, before we move on to talking to uh, Hallie about her work, I wanted to draw in Hallie and Jana into the conversation as well, and just to get your sort of initial, I guess, thoughts about these works and the conversation thus far. Jana, do you have any sort of responses? And then I'll move to Hallie next.
I yeah, I mean, I really find it interesting how we can look historically at the idea of being queer, what it means to be a queer person. Like, I really liked what Jax was saying about decades ago that piece of work was created, and still to this day there's that like connection and that shared experience. But Hallie brought up a really good point yesterday about World War II. I don't know if she's willing to share. I thought I wanted to give space for her to share that.
Oh yeah, totally. I love this with Jared French for this. But as we were looking at this piece, so this was one of the pieces that we with going through on the website. I think this was like the first one that I picked. And I remember I got it, and when I was looking at this piece, thinking about World War II. About World War II with because when I looked at this piece was made pretty much after we finished, and you can see in blue, right? They at least to me, they kind of look out. They're all blue. They're very really uncomfortable. Not like down to like where there's like all that. And there are some things they're not wearing at all. And to me, that reminds me, especially with the gas chambers. Like to me, going up the steps with and these people here, one going one going the other way. For some reason, it reminded me of the gas chambers and how they just shove everyone. And there's also kind of shame, especially with the naked people, because they're naked, they're more vulnerable than people. But B, generally the whole idea of World War II was shame, at least to that were forced to be in these concentration camps, right? We're all like, we don't like you, we're gonna kill you now. So they thought that maybe something was wrong with them and what we're doing. So you kind of have this sense of shame yet with that too, right? Because they were just living their life themselves, and suddenly the Nazis came in and they were like, "We don't like you. We're gonna kill you now." And they were like, "What? No, can you not?" So yeah, that's what I was thinking
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting connection, and I know I think Hallie's your connection's a little choppy, so I just want to maybe I'll sort of synthesize about because we talked about it yesterday, but Hallie was really sort of thinking and responding to or thinking about World War II and specifically the sort of murder of not only Jews but also queer people were part of the sort of murders that had happened in Nazi Germany and across Eastern Europe or Central Europe. And so this is what it sort of brought to her, especially probably that connection with the date. This is made in 1947. I think that's a really sort of really interesting connection, and also how maybe a benign, not a benign image of this might also be soldiers in a bathroom or men getting ready to shower in a sort of a shared bathroom kind of environment. It could be a really benign image, but just the poses and also the date, right, make us sort of think about it in a really particular way. So Hallie, I had a question for you. Is it possible for you to jump on your phone? Is that easier for you to do? And maybe we can go to Jonna next and then have you last. Does that sound okay? So I feel like that might, I want to make sure that we can hear you clearly. That's all. Right. Jonna, do you mind if we jump to you now? Is that cool? Great. Okay, Jonna. So you, Jonna, you selected a large-scale photographic work by British artist Gilbert and George, which is made up of multiple framed photographs that together produce a single image. And I think we're looking at it now. I think it's from 1983. It's titled Speakers. It's really huge. It's almost like mural-like in size. I recall in our conversation, and we had several conversations, that you found it really formally interesting. There's lots of really kind of fascinating details, and it's really complex. What are some of the sort of aspects or details of this image that really attracted you? And what do you think is going on here? Like, what are some of your initial responses, ways into the image?
Yeah, I find a few things like stuck out at me. First was the bright colors and the aspect of like the collage look of the photo, like it's different photos that were then placed together. And the bright color, I mean, I just said the bright colors strike me as very, very specific time in art, I think, like in that, because it was created in the 80s and I've seen lots of art from that time. Thinking of other queer artists who also use bright colors in such a way, like Keith Haring, makes me think of is there a connection there? And then the way they're standing and the way that like they're touching is just interesting. When I first saw it, I thought that these two were like co-dictators of an area, something like that. And I still don't know. And I think it's interesting. So I'm curious as to I don't know. Those are just things that strike me at first.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're pointing out you're really pointing out like the scale of their bodies in relationship to this sort of landscape that's around them, which is like an industrial landscape. And most likely East London, where the artist lived since like the late 1960s, and they still live in East London, which is an industrial area, working class area. And yeah, they're sort of, they kind of stand above it, you know. And I know one of the things that they were sort of inspired by or trying mimicking is sort of church windows, um, you know, like stained glass in a way, and it makes me think of it's actually a really good follow up to maybe Evasion in a way because of the maybe the religious context a little bit, and that's something that maybe they might have been thinking about. I think their position also reminds me of partially you know, the position you would see of like saints from the medieval, you know, in a medieval church or something like that with their hand up or something like that. But I like the way you're pointing out their closeness and their, you know, their closeness to one another. And what is you wanted to know more about the artists, right? What, if I'm correct,
Yeah,
what are some like thoughts that you had? Yeah.
well, they're a couple, as we've mentioned, and this is a picture of the two of them. What like I want to know like why is this a queer piece of art? Like what does this say about their relationship? That kind of thing. And then again relating it to I guess back to what I was saying about like the bright colors. This was done in the 1980s, and that was a time when the AIDS pandemic was a very serious issue for the queer community. And so I'm curious, I when I saw this and thought about it more and was like, okay, these are queer artists who are doing this at this time with these bright colors. I know Keith Haring does very similar work, not obviously different style, but the use of color is something that I think is that a statement to the AIDS epidemic, and is that like
Hmm.
a theme between these two artists who are from different parts of the world, and especially I know in London or in England there was lack of knowledge, especially in the early years of the AIDS epidemic, of what is AIDS and how are we able to handle the situation. Not that it was much better in America, but there was more like knowledge and science being directed towards this is an issue, but it was like completely ignored in England from what I know, and stuff like that. But yeah.
No, those are really good questions. I mean, so the artists here are Gilbert and George. George Passmore is the one on the right, and Gilbert Proche is the one on the left. And they met in art school in the late 60s, I think in 1966, 1967 in London, and they became artistic partners as well as life partners. And in some ways, there's a real blurring between their personal partnership and their artistic partnership. And they made that a really sort of, I think that's something that is all throughout their work. Is they first were kind of they kind of performed. They would sometimes sing songs. They talked about themselves as a living sculpture. Um, but then their work took many sort of different turns. But one of the things I think that is always underlying is that it was, you know, knowledge that they were also lovers, right, and in a sort of a romantic partnership as well. So I think that's something I think that you're sort of particularly picking up on here, especially with the poses. And now I'm seeing like the way that they're the hands that are not the ones that are upright, but that are sort of or downwards, are like kind of positioned close to their crotches, which is kind of interesting. And I wonder if there's some meaning in that as well, right? Um, yeah, I think, and I hope that answers your question. Does that make you see this in a bit of a new way, knowing that?
Interesting because it feels very formal, yet they're touching, if that makes sense. Like it's very like they're just I don't know how to describe it better, but it's it there doesn't seem to they're a couple, it doesn't the way they're standing and touching doesn't feel intimate when you look at it. is what I guess
That's true.
it was what I'm getting at. So I think that's kind of interesting. But that's it. I'm glad I know the background of sort of the performance that they did performance and uh so sorry, Claire, just to clarify, did you say that they that it was like more underlying that they were together and it wasn't really talked about as much? Is that what you said?
That's a really good question. It's something I admit, like I don't have full knowledge of. I think it was probably probably more understood than maybe overt, but it seems to be that's something that everyone knows about them, at least speaking as a person who got to know who they were as artists in the 1990s. So that was a different time period. It's a good question of whether that was public knowledge in the late 1960s and into the 1970s. That's a
And
really good, really.
that could also be to know what time frame they were living in, of like, well, they couldn't be as like openly a couple back in the 70s or the 60s and 70s. So yeah.
I mean, one of the things I think that came out, and I do, there's some great comments, and we have one more thing to get to before we get to Hallie here. But I think in our conversation in preparation yesterday, one of the things that came up was that in 1967 there was a law on the books in England about that was basically criminalized homosexual male sex, buggery, and so that was only removed, and homosexual male sex was only decriminalized in 1967, which is around the time that they met. So that gives you a sense of I think you're right, Jana, of like what conditions they might have been living under and how out they could be. Maybe their art was a way for them to do that. We have some wonderful comments. Alan Harris and Craig Hoffman said about this work, if you see the piece in light of stained glass windows, you might see the green pieces, these sort of branches coming out of their mouths as palm branches, part of the Christian story of Jesus. And they ask, what is this heralding? I think that's a really great question. And then L. Petznick from CSU, Ohio says, I see an environmental connection. They appear to be standing on a pile of trash, and yet they are pristine and clean in their appearance, and they proclaim what is natural. They represent what is natural. I think that's a really beautiful, cool reading. And also one of the things that, Jana, to your point about it relating to the sort of time of the AIDS crisis, I don't know about this work specifically, but they were very, at this point, concerned about a lot of social issues in their work. So I think that's something that's really, quite important to address. Now, I want to maybe also draw in sort of Hallie to our conversation. So I'm sorry, and Hallie, it's great to have you. I'm glad that I think this connection maybe is a little better, if I'm correct. So Hallie, the work that you chose is a photograph by the Polish-German artist Jermaine Krull. And I admit that Krull, this photograph and Jermaine Krull herself were really new to me. We're looking at it now. This was made in 1928 when the artist was working in Paris and involved in the Surrealist movement. Now, you had a really immediate reaction to it. Could you tell us about how you initially interpreted the work?
Yeah. So I'm gonna hope that y'all can hear me. And just hope that this is working. So this piece is hand-induced by Jermaine Krull, and I feel like this piece really captures the desperation of suicide and like mental illness really delicately. You see these blurred hands, right? And they're reaching out for something that looks like a noose almost, at least when how I saw it, how I interpreted it. And these hands are wanting to reach out to it, but they're never quite able to. It almost captures that life is still like moving. It's still going on, but the character in the picture wants that to end, and they want to reach out to this news, but it's just so far away that they can't get to it. And I love how all of the lighting and the angles and all the shadows perfectly encapsulate all of the emotions that desperation of like suicide and stuff makes you feel all in one picture. And especially with like the blurred hands too, I feel like that really captures its desperateness. We were talking earlier about how the noose looking thing, I guess, shadow up here was actually this like light fixture thing, or like the innards of a light fixture thing. So I think it's interesting that, at least in my brain, that I saw it that way. It's just the random innards of a light fixture. When you look at it, like the way that she photographed it, you're like, oh yeah, that's a noose, definitely. So I think it's interesting. At least my brain just jumped there. Um, so yeah.
No, I mean, I think you're totally picking up. I think you probably are thinking probably the same way Jermaine Krull might have been. For me, like knowing that she was involved in surrealism and those artists were interested in sort of kind of how benign things could really, there's maybe some kind of dark undercurrent to them, right? So, like this light fixture, when lit the right way, reveals this image of sort of death and suicide, right? Like this sort of dark alternate reality. So I think you're probably Jermaine Krull probably noticed that and photographed this, right? And then you're noticing that too. So I think that's really in sync, right, with the artist, which is awesome. In a way, even though it's a really dark subject, I think it's really connects to surrealism in a lot of ways. Now, you were also drawn to another photograph by Krull. It was on. I know we each kind of came up with a list of things you were interested in, which we can show now, which is called "And by Chance," which was also from her time in Paris from around 1930. And you learned more about the artist from our photo curator Barbara Tannenbaum, specifically how Krull was this example of this kind of sexually liberal new woman of the 20s and 30s, and had romances with men and women. How did this new information help you see this image and interpret it?
Yeah. So when Barbara was sent out more information about the artist, she said that Jermaine Krull was bisexual. And me, in this picture, I feel like that really brings out a lot here, because, I mean, when you're looking at this, at least to me, I see a woman, but like the hair is short up here and you can't see a face, and it's black and white. So, you can't tell. I mean, you can, but you can't at the same time, right? And obviously we shouldn't assume things. I really like how dark this piece is too. There's so many shadows and it's black and white, and the person is face down and you just kind of see their back, and like, I don't know, they're in this like weird like plank position thing that's going on. So I think I really like how dark this piece is too, because if I'm remembering correctly, at least Hand and Noose one was like 1920, maybe 1928, I think. Um, and this piece kind of is dark, and I like that it was in the 20s, right, when LGBT people maybe weren't as like out, and they weren't as maybe proud of themselves as they should be, because it's the 20s, right? We really didn't see a lot of LGBT people in the 20s, or at least out LGBT people in the 20s. So this piece being kind of dark, right? It's almost kind of like how what we were talking about earlier with the Jared French thing. That there's kind of maybe this like shame to that. And that's why this piece looks like so dark and black and white, and you can only see the person's back and all that. So that could potentially be a reason why it's so dark, because Jermaine Krull probably had this like inner shame of like, I'm gay, oh my goodness, like that sort of thing, because it was made in the 20s. So that's kind of how I interpreted this piece.
Also, these different sort of, I think, sexual freedoms and liberal sexual environments, where people kind of ebb and flow over time. And I feel like the 20s and 30s, depending on where you were, might have been a place of more sort of ability for expression. But I think at the same time, not maybe equivalent to today, right? what I really like you're pointing out here is the sort of the fact that we don't there's an ambiguity, a queerness maybe to this figure, and I think that's a really beautiful interpretation, right? I'd like to draw Jana and Jackson to the conversation here before we sort of wrap up and ask some questions or could take some questions from the audience. But Jax, do you have any sort of particular reactions to the conversation with Hallie and this work about Jermaine Krull? This work by Jermaine Krull, sorry.
I really enjoyed what she had to say, especially about the hands and noose photo, because I think I didn't like, you see that there are hands and there are noose, but like she caught on to so much more emotion and so much more like desire, like so much more emotion and like hardship there than I just like I initially was like, oh, that's nice, or like not nice, but like okay, that's like that, but like she caught on to so much more, and then the ambiguity with this photo, and I mean, I guess it's interesting to think because like the 20s was like sort of better for queer people than like the 50s or like 40s or things like that, but like it's still like very much hidden, and so, but it's interesting that like I wonder if she existed at any other time, would this art have even existed, or would she have even like, been able to take these photographs?
That's a really great thought, a really great question. Jana, do you have anything you'd like to build on from that?
Yeah, I just think, well, when I see the second piece, I just see this sort of just vulnerability of like I can it just provokes this like feeling of vulnerability of this is I mean it's a nude photo of a woman, and I think it's not meant to be like sexy or provocative. It's just naturally like you can't even see her face, so there's just that vulnerability there that is just like really striking to me, and I think that is interesting when you think about the sort of queer experience that many people have and the conversations we've already had, maybe relating to evasion and relating to mental illness with hands and noose. Yeah.
No, thank you. I think
also,
you're bringing.
can I add something?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I also want to add something real quick. This piece was made in Paris, right? So typically in European nations, they're more open to nudity than us Americans are, and I think that's really interesting too. And I feel like that adds a layer to this piece because, like, sure, they're nude and therefore they're vulnerable and stuff, but also it's Paris, so it's like, well, they're nude, but like Paris, like you kind of see nudity more in Europe than here, so I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and there's also like even an artistic sort of current. There's actually a really great comment from Petsnick who says typical nudes of women in their mind are frontal, right, where you see the breasts and you see the front of the body. Here it is reversed and might suggest a modesty or maybe an alternative beauty. And then El Petsnick also adds those works are often photographed or painted by men too, right? And this is a woman artist doing that. So it's really interesting. I mean, I think we could do a whole program and analysis. We could write a whole book on this painting, on this photograph, right? Because it's so rich. But I love the way all of you are bringing these ideas to forward, right? Now I want to ask our audience, because if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat. Your comments are really great, and maybe we can address a few. And I just maybe want to ask very quickly to our guests, that's like, as LGBTQ plus youth, what does it mean to go to a museum or go to our collection, right, and see members of our community represented online or on the museum walls and floors? Like, what does it mean to locate these artists as queer, right? I'll just go down but Jana, what are your sort of initial thoughts? And
Yeah, I will say sort of figuring out what being queer means to you is a long journey, and also something that, like, personally I have not recognized until recently in my life. And so I think even though we're all fairly young and, like, gay marriage was legalized only a few years ago. I was in 7th or 8th grade when that happened, and so that doesn't seem like a long time, but having no, like, queer representation for a very long time in my life and, like, not seeing it firsthand probably made it harder to figure out how to be queer, like, what being queer means. So I think it's very important that I've been going to the art museum since I was little. So to be like, for somebody to be like, "Oh, that's a artist made by a gay person and or a queer person or a lesbian or a trans person," and, like, how like, that's just to I've been going there since I was a kid, and so I think that's just, like, a really powerful thing that, like, now children are being exposed to, I guess, if that makes sense. So, um, I think it's important for knowledge and just learning, but yeah.
Jax, what does it mean to you?
A whole lot. Because I really love art, and I love, like, you can see my room. There's literally visual art everywhere. I love, like, connecting and expressing my experiences and, like, um feelings through visual art, and I love seeing that from other, like, reflected from other people. And so I seeing, like, art that I know is made by a queer person, or I know it is like, oh, shaking my desk. Is made by a queer person, or is like expressing queer events or experiences, just like, it makes me, like, so happy, and so, like, I can do that too, or, like, okay, I can, because sometimes, like, I don't even know how to paint my experiences, or I don't know how to visually show them because, like, I haven't seen that, and so I'm like, so um seeing art by queer people is, like, so important to me, because, like, I have this funny story, and I'll say it real quickly, where I got to go to the MoMA in Washington, and, like, I saw this clock. These They had an exhibit of artwork from the 80s with that related to, like, the AIDS epidemic, and they had the Perfect Lovers, which is, like, two clocks by Felix Gonzalez Torres, and so and it's just like, I literally screamed because I knew what that piece of artwork was, and I saw it in person, and I was like, um I screamed out loud in an art museum because I was just so excited, and so, um like wow. So it's really, really, it means a lot, and it can really, like, impact how I can tell my stories, and knowing that other people have told them before me.
It's great. Hallie, what does it mean to you?
Um, okay. I have just a lot of things on my mind. So I didn't find out I was bi until my freshman year of high school. And when you find out you're queer, and any identity, right? My life makes a lot more sense now, and that's kind of how how that felt, especially when it comes to, like, art and things. Like, I'll see things and I'll be like, huh, like, wow, this makes a lot of sense. Um, so um, I really like queer people in art. Because obviously representation, and especially as an artist myself, it's just really cool to see other queer people making art, and they're just, like, there, and they're being themselves, and it's great. But also because I feel like me being queer gives a new meaning to art and to writing pieces. Like, this is more on the writing side of things, but there's this poet who I love called Richard Steichen. His name's Richard Steichen, and whenever I read his poetry, as a queer person, I'm like, "Oh my god, this is so queer, like, there's so much, like, stuff in here, and there's so much, like, I can relate to it so much." But I feel like if someone who was straight read it, they'd be like, "Huh, interesting," like, they wouldn't really connect to it as much as I do. So, I know that's more on the writing side of things, but I feel like art can do that too. Like when you're queer and you see something, you're like, oh my god, I love it. But like if a straight person comes, they're like, what does it mean? Like that sort of thing. So.
No, that's a great way of thinking about it. You can really make that sort of personal, that sort of deeper connection, and you can maybe use it more for your own processing, is what I hear also from you, Jax, as well, right? Jonna, I know we'll go over by a couple of minutes, but Jonna, I think there's a great question that came in. I think you'd like to, if you mind, reading it out to everybody, and maybe you can answer, and then.
Yeah, so Alan Harris and Craig Hoffman commented and said, we would love to know if the panelists feel in their current settings freedom to be open as LGBTQIA+ in their creativity and artistry. Do they have role models for the artistic freedom? I really like that question. I feel as if, as a young, creative, artistic person, I've spent a lot of time looking up to people. I mean, traditionally, I'm a musician. That's my main art form that I indulge in. But I do like to do art, like visual art, on my spare time, and other kinds of things. But I think I've always felt that in my life, having role models that look like me, that and this goes to any identity that looks like you, or is I can speak on the more idea of like being a woman and like seeing a male dominated industry like the music industry or other artistic avenues, and not seeing women, especially queer women, who represent me. And so I can't come to say of anybody in particular in the world that is like a role model, but I found role models in my own community of friends and family that have really spoken to me and helped me embrace being creative. And that's a lovely thing about the LGBT Center. I found a sense of community there, and having adults there that are queer people who want to embrace our creativity fully, and stuff like that. So yeah, I really but yeah, and then somebody else somebody else mentioned in the chat about Miles said about, as an LGBT person of color, I feel I don't see myself in some spaces. My queerness may be represented, but is my blackness, and about how they recently visited a Zenel Maholi exhibit. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm apologize if I'm not.
You did a great job, though.
Oh, thank you. And felt both were finally represented, and I think that's really important to people, and that goes back to our question of what does it mean to be a queer youth and see queer people, and so then I guess that's my thoughts on that. But this idea of like intersectionality is super important, to being queer, to being an artist, to being a human, and recognizing that in all avenues. But yeah.
Totally. And I'm glad that Miles brought that up, because we actually, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind showing it, we have a photograph by D'Angelo Lavelle Williams. That's a new acquisition that we were going to bring into the conversation in relation to Gilbert and George, but because of time. But it's really, I think, Miles, this photograph is probably for this artist, and the artist is on the left side, and the right side is the artist partner, lover. It was important for the artist to sort of make this image that shows this sort of level of intimacy and contact, queer intimacy and contact. So it wasn't something that he was seeing, and so he made it, right? And we have a few photographs by this artist, and as well as Aneli Mahoney in the collection. So that's really great. I'm glad that we get to show this, because we were bummed that I was like, oh, we gotta catch up. But maybe as a way to sort of maybe quickly sort of wrap up, Jax and Hallie, do you have any thoughts about specifically your role models for artistic freedom?
I got fortunate because I had a really great teacher early on who just like introduced me to a lot of queer work, and like actually like I have a funny story, or I'll be really fast, but like our school went to a museum and they had a transgender artist, Greer Langton, at the Mattress Factory, um, where like where they were going to show a lot of her work, and I had just come out as trans, and it was like very new experience for me, and they weren't going to let us see it because it was like it's queer, and so it's not always the most appropriate, and so but like he like snuck me in and let me see the artwork, and I just remember that being so impactful to me, and like being like such like I don't know, just getting to like see that and see like I still have some of her work on my walls now, but like just seeing like getting to see that and see like, oh, there's a transgender person in this art museum who made this art, and like they're celebrating it, And so I've been really fortunate to have like a lot of really good role models and people who've helped me along.
That's really great. Thank you for sharing that story, because it also means that museums should not make those that these are topics that people your age should be thinking about and exposed to, not kept from. Hallie, please.
Yeah, totally. So I write about being queer all the time. But I feel like some of my role models are more on the writing side than the art. Richard's like I mentioned before, Fatima, I can never say her last name for my life. Ashgar, I think is how you say it. She's actually a queer Muslim woman writer. She's fantastic. Maver, who's more of a novelist than a poet, but they're fantastic. Nita Tyndall, who's amazing. So yeah, I have art, but yeah, I have tons of queer, more writing specific role models in my life.
Well, that's great. Now I'm going to write all these down after. So I appreciate. I'm going to take your knowledge now. Thank you, Hallie. We appreciate it. So I know we're over time, so I think we're gonna. And there's wonderful comments and questions, which means there's more to say, which is always a good thing. But I think that's a good place to end. I want to thank all of you for the three of you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Jax. Thank you, Hallie, and thank you, Jana. It's been a wonderful experience. I want to thank everyone out there for joining us this afternoon. Just a few sort of bits of information. Tonight we're having our distinguished lecture in Chinese art. It's tonight at 7 p.m. Please join us. And also on Wednesday, June 16th at noon is our next desktop dialogue, Craft and Contemporary Art. We'll be looking at artists Mrinalini Mukherjee, Robert Morris, and Zelia Sanchez, all of whom are on view in CMA's Contemporary Gallery reinstallation. We're going to have artist Surabi Ghosh of Concordia University and CMA curator Sonia Rimace discuss the work of these artists, the global scope of the CMA's newly reinstalled contemporary galleries, and the investment in material exploration and craft traditions in contemporary art. It should be a really interesting conversation. Find out about these two programs and other ones at cma.org. And if you'd like to explore more of the work in our collection, visit CMA Collection online. Also check out the LGBTQ plus Artists After 1900 filter under popular search terms. And if we didn't get to your question during the program, or if you have more, you can always go to Artland's Ask on the CMA website, and someone will get back to you with an answer. Links for all of the above are below. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good afternoon. Stay well, and happy Pride.